In 2003, a massive blackout swept across the northeastern United States. 50 million people lost power. Grocery stores went dark. Gas pumps stopped work within hours. Food distribution chains began to collapse. Entire cities found themselves cut off from the systems that fed them. Panic buying emptied shelves. Refrigerated warehouses began warming. Perishable food worth millions of dollars started spoiling. But in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, something strange happened. While the modern world panicked, the Amish continued farming. Their plows moved through the soil. Their silos stayed full. Their communities ate as they always had. The horses didn't care about power grids. The hand tools didn't need electricity. The root cellars kept food cold without refrigeration. They didn't notice the blackout at all. This wasn't luck. It was design. Modern agriculture is a miracle of efficiency. A single farmer today can feed over 160 people. Industrial farms produce yields our ancestors couldn't imagine. We've engineered seeds that resist disease, automated harvests that work around the clock, and created supply chains that move food thousands of miles. A tomato picked in California on Monday sits on a shelf in New York by Thursday. Corn harvested in Iowa becomes chicken feed in Georgia, beef feed in Texas, and ethanol in Michigan. It's a system built on precision, technology, and global coordination. The numbers are staggering. American farms produce over 400 million tons of corn annually. Wheat yields have tripled since the 1950s. Soybean production has increased 500%. We grow more food on less land, using fewer workers than any civilization in human history. This is the triumph of industrial agriculture. But there's something most people don't realize about this system. Something that doesn't appear in the statistics or the efficiency reports. It's fragile. Catastrophically fragile. Every step depends on electricity, on fuel deliveries that arrive exactly on schedule, on chemical factories running without interruption, on computer networks managing inventory across continents, on refrigerated trucks maintaining precise temperatures, on processing plants operating at full capacity, on retailers restocking within narrow time windows. Remove any single piece, and the entire structure begins to crack. Average grocery store holds enough food for 3 days. After that, they depend on new deliveries. There are no warehouses full of backup supplies sitting nearby. No reserves. No safety. Margin. The food is always in motion, flowing through the system like blood through veins. Stop the flow, and the system dies. The Amish rejected this system over a century ago. Not because they feared progress or worshipped the past, but because they understood something we've forgotten. They built their farms on a different principle entirely. A principle that prioritizes resilience over efficiency, sustainability over scale, independence over optimization. And today, while modern agriculture races toward increasing complexity, adding sensors and satellites and owl-driven crop management, Amish farms operate on methods that survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, the oil crises of the 70s, every economic recession, and every supply chain disruption in between. The question isn't whether modern farming is more productive. It obviously is. The question is what happens when the things it depends on disappear. What happens when the fuel stops flowing? When the electricity goes out for weeks instead of hours? When fertilizer factories close? When the computer networks that manage everything do dark? They require it. We've bred seeds that produce massive yields only under ideal chemical conditions. Plant them without fertilizer and they perform worse than heritage varieties. We've optimized plants for a world where chemicals are always available. We've made them dependent. Pesticides and herbicides keep industrial monocultures alive. When you plant 1,000 acres of identical calm, you create a paradise for insects and weeds. Every pest that adapts to corn suddenly has unlimited food. Every weed that thrives in cornfields has unlimited space, without chemical intervention. Then there's the seed itself. Most industrial farmers don't save seed anymore. They purchase it annually from agricultural corporations. These seeds are often hybrid varieties that don't breed true. Save seeds from a hybrid corn plant, and the next generation produces wildly inconsistent results. The system is designed this way. Deliberately. It creates a permanent dependency on seed companies. Some seeds are genetically modified to resist specific herbicides or produce their own pesticides. These traits are patented. Saving seed from these varieties is illegal. Farmers must purchase new seed every year. If the seed companies closed tomorrow, if the distribution networks falled, farmers would have nothing to plant. They've given up seed sovereignty for short-term gains in yield. Equipment requires constant maintenance and replacement parts. A modern combine costs $500,000 and contains computer systems more complex than spacecraft from the Apollo missions. When something breaks, and things always break, you need specialized parts from the manufacturer. You need technicians trained on that specific equipment. You need diagnostic software that connects to company servers. If the supply chain for John Deere parts failed, thousands of combines would sit useless in fields. The harvest would rot. And here's the thing about modern equipment. It's designed to break. Planned obsolescence. Right to repair laws have been fought viciously by manufacturers because they profit from forced dependency. Farmers can't fix their own equipment anymore. They're locked into service contracts and proprietary systems. Irrigation systems need electricity to pump water. In California's Central Valley, which produces a quarter of America's food, farms depend on massive pumping operations to bring water from distant sources. No electricity means no water. No water means no crops. The entire region's productivity depends on power grids functioning continuously. Grain storage requires climate control to prevent spoilage. Modern silos are sophisticated operations with temperature monitoring, moisture control, and pest management systems. All of it powered by electricity. All of it managed by computers. Store grain in traditional silos without climate control, and you risk enormous losses to mold, insects, and rodents. And finally, there's distribution. This is where the fragility becomes truly obvious. Food doesn't sit on farms anymore. It moves immediately into refrigerated trucks that must maintain specific temperatures. Those trucks deliver to processing plants that must operate at full capacity to handle the volume. The processed food goes to regional distribution centers that must coordinate deliveries to thousands of retail locations. They create fertilizer from their own livestock manure, which they compost and spread using methods refined over generations. This isn't inferior to chemical fertilizer. It's different. Chemical fertilizer provides pure nutrients but does nothing for soil structure. It's like giving plants vitamins without food. Composted manure provides nutrients and improves soil structure. It adds organic matter. It supports beneficial microorganisms. It increases water retention. Over time, it builds soil health instead of depleting it. Their fields are small, usually between 20 and 60 acres per family. This isn't inefficiency, it's strategy. Smaller fields can be managed by human labor and animal power. They require no fuel, no massive machinery, no computerized systems. A father and his sons can plant, maintain, and harvest these fields using tools they built themselves in their own workshops. The scale is deliberate. Too large and you need industrial equipment. Too small and you can't sustain a family. The Amish have found the equilibrium point where human labor and animal power can produce enough food for the family plus surplus for sale, without requiring any external inputs. Beyond basic hand tools. Crop rotation is mandatory. This isn't optional or suggested. It's enforced by community expectations. Corn one year, then hay, then soybeans, then wheat. This prevents soil depletion and naturally controls pests. Different crops use different soil nutrients. They attract different pests. They leave different residues. Rotating them maintains balance. There's no need for chemical pest control when you don't plant the same crop repeatedly. The insects that eat calm can't survive on soybeans. The weeds that thrive in wheat fields struggle in cornfields. By rotating, you break the pest cycles naturally. The soil regenerates itself between demanding crops. The system maintains equilibrium. Livestock integration is critical to the entire operation. Horses provide labor in the fields. Cows provide milk for the family and for sale. Meat for consumption. More manure for fertilizer. Chickens produce eggs daily. They eat kitchen scraps and insects. They provide meat when needed. Pigs convert food waste into protein. They'll eat anything. They grow fast. They provide rich manure. Every animal serves multiple purposes, and their waste becomes fertilizer. Nothing is wasted. Everything cycles. The horses that plow the fields eat the hay from those same fields and produce manure that fertilizes them. The chickens eat crop waste and produce eggs and fertilizer. The pigs eat everything else and turn it into meat. It's a closed ecosystem. Food preservation happens on site, not in distant facilities. Root cellars keep vegetables fresh through winter without electricity. The Amish rejected this system over a century ago, not because they feared progress or worshipped the past, but because they understood something we've forgotten. They built their farms on a different principle entirely, a principle that prioritizes resilience over efficiency, sustainability over scale, independence over optimization. And today, while modern agriculture races toward increasing complexity, adding sensors and satellites and owl-driven crop management, Amish farms operate on methods that survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, the oil crises of the 70s, every economic recession, and every supply chain disruption in between. The question isn't whether modern farming is more productive. It obviously is. The question is what happens when the things it depends on disappear. What happens when the fuel stops flowing? When the electricity goes out for weeks instead of hours? When fertilizer factories close? When the computer networks that manage everything go dark? The Amish already know the answer, because they've been preparing for that question since the day they chose a different path. Let's be absolutely clear about what modern farming actually requires. Not in theory, not in the sanitized version presented in agricultural reports, but in practical daily reality. Every industrial farm begins with fuel, diesel fuel specifically. Tractors, combines, irrigation pumps, grain dryers, delivery trucks, all of them run on diesel. The average American farm uses over 5,000 gallons per year. Larger operations use 50,000 gallons or more. Without steady deliveries from refineries, which depend on crude oil from wells, which depend on global shipping networks, which depend on political stability in oil-producing regions, the machines stop. The fields go unplanted. The crops go unharvested. The food chain breaks at the very first link. Consider what happens during a fuel shortage. We saw this in the 1970s during the OPEC oil embargo. Gas stations ran dry. Prices quadrupled overnight. Farmers who could get fuel paid triple what they'd budgeted. Many couldn't plant full acreage. Harvests dropped. Food prices spiked. And that was a temporary shortage. A true, sustained cutoff would be exponentially worse. Then there's fertilizer. Modern seeds are bred for maximum yield, but only if they receive precise chemical nutrition. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. These aren't natural additions. They're industrial products. Nitrogen fertilizer comes from natural gas through the Haber-Bosch process. Phosphorus is mined and processed using enormous amounts of energy. Potassium comes from potash mines scattered across the world. Each of these requires functional factories, reliable energy supplies, and global distribution networks. During the energy crisis of the 1970s, fertilizer shortages caused food prices to spike 40% in a single year. During the pandemic, fertilizer plants reduced operations. Supplies tightened. Prices doubled, then tripled. Farmers paid more. Yields dropped in regions where farmers couldn't afford the inputs. The system strained. And here's what most people don't understand. Modern crops aren't just improved by fertilizer. Lettuce wilts, berries soften, milk sours. The average meal travels 1,500 miles before reaching your plate. Every mile is a potential failure point. The system works beautifully when everything functions. It's a triumph of logistics and coordination. But it operates with almost no redundancy, no parallel systems. Just-in-time delivery means just barely enough. The efficiency comes from eliminating all slack. And finally, there's distribution. This is where the fragility becomes truly obvious. Food doesn't sit on farms anymore. It moves immediately into refrigerated trucks that must maintain specific temperatures. When diesel supplies tighten, farms shut down. When power grids fail, food spoils. When one fertilizer factory closes, supplies vanish from an entire region. When a processing plant has an outbreak, meat disappears from supermarkets nationwide. When a shipping company has labor disputes, ports back up and produce rots on docks. The system is efficient precisely because it has no margin for error. And that means small disruptions cascade into major crises very quickly. Amish farms don't depend on any of this. Not by accident, by deliberate, carefully maintained choice. Walk onto an Amish property and you'll see something that looks like it belongs in a different century. Horses pull plows through fields in straight, careful lines. Hand tools harvest vegetables. Windmills pump water into elevated tanks. Grain gets stored in wooden silos that require no electricity, no computer monitoring, no connection to any grid. But this isn't primitive. It's not a rejection of knowledge or capability. It's intentional engineering for a different goal. Where modern farms optimize for maximum yield, Amish farms optimize for independence, for resilience, for the ability to continue operating regardless of external circumstances. Amish farming operates on a closed-loop system. They breed their own horses and mules for field work. A good draft horse can work for 15 years. They breed replacements from their own stock. They save seeds from each harvest to plant the next year. This is standard practice. Has been for generations. They select the best plants, harvest the seeds, dry them properly, and store them in cool, dry locations. Next spring, those seeds go into the ground. There's no annual purchase required. No dependency on seed companies. No patents. No restrictions. Complete seed sovereignty. They create fertilizer from their own livestock manure, which they compost and spread using methods refined over generations. This isn't inferior to chemical fertilizer. It's different. Chemical fertilizer provides pure nutrients but does nothing for soil structure. It's like giving plants vitamins without food. Composted manure provides nutrients and improves soil structure. It adds organic matter. It supports beneficial microorganisms. It increases water retention. Over time, it builds soil. Preserved enough food to last until next harvest. This independence is built into every aspect of their system. And perhaps most importantly, the community shares labor. This is the secret that makes everything else possible. When one family needs to raise a barn, 100 people arrive. Men frame and roof. Women prepare food. Children clear debris. In a single day, a complete barn stands where there was nothing that morning. The family whose barn was raised will return the favor when others need help. When harvest time comes, neighbors work together. Multiple families coordinate to harvest each farm in sequence. Nobody works alone. The labor is distributed. The burden is shared. This isn't charity. It's mutual insurance. Everyone contributes because everyone benefits. No single family can fail because no single family works alone. This communal structure extends to everything. Equipment is shared. Knowledge is shared. Resources are pooled when needed. If one family's crop fails, others help. If someone gets injured, the community supports them. There's no concept of individual success or failure, only collective sustainability. And this makes their agricultural system possible. You can't farm independently without modern equipment. It's too much work. But you can farm independently with community support. The Amish have preserved both independence from outside systems, interdependence within their community. The Amish didn't invent this system. They preserved it. This is important to understand. Everything they do was once standard practice. This was normal, standard, unremarkable. It worked because it had to work. Before industrial agriculture, every farm in America operated similarly. Families grew diverse crops, raised multiple animals, saved their own seeds, and relied on community networks for major projects. There was no other option. Go back to the 1800s. Visit any farm. You'd see crop rotation, livestock integration, seed saving, community barn raisings, food preservation, all of it. These weren't Amish practices. They were farming practices. Everyone did them because they were necessary for survival. This was standard practice for thousands of years across every agricultural civilization. Roman farms operated on similar principles. Medieval European farms, Chinese farms, Indian farms, African farms. The details varied by climate and culture, but the fundamentals remained constant. Closed-loop systems, crop diversity, livestock integration, community cooperation. It worked. It survived droughts because diverse crops meant some succeeded even when others failed. It survived wars because local production continued even when trade routes closed. It survived economic collapses because farms didn't depend on external markets for inputs. It survived plagues because distributed food production meant disease in one region didn't cause famine everywhere. What changed was cheap oil. This is the turning point. After World War II, petroleum became abundant and inexpensive. Wartime production had built enormous refining capacity. Peacetime needed new markets for all that production capacity. Agriculture became one of those markets. Suddenly, it made economic sense to replace horses with tractors. Tractors could work longer hours without tiring. They could pull larger equipment. They could work faster. But they needed fuel. Regular fuel deliveries, maintenance, replacement parts. The trade-off seemed worth it. It made sense to replace manure with synthetic fertilizer. Why wait for composting when you could buy concentrated nutrients? Why dedicate land to livestock when you could plant more cash crops, abundant and inexpensive? Wartime production had built enormous refining capacity. Peacetime needed new markets for all that production capacity. Agriculture became one of those markets. Suddenly, it made economic sense to replace horses with tractors. Tractors could work longer hours, without tiring. They could pull larger equipment, they could work faster, but they needed fuel. Regular fuel deliveries, maintenance, replacement parts. The trade-off seemed worth it. It made sense to replace manure with synthetic fertilizer. Why wait for composting when you could buy concentrated nutrients? Why dedicate land to livestock when you could plant more cash crops? The yields increased dramatically. The profits looked attractive. But farms became dependent on fertilizer suppliers. Why grow cover crops when you can use herbicides? It made sense to replace crop rotation with monocultures sustained by chemicals. Why grow hay when you don't have horses? Plant one high-value crop continuously. Maximize profit per acre. The cash flow improved, but the soil began degrading. Each change made individual economic sense. Each increased short-term profits. Each one reduced immediate labor requirements. So farmers adopted them. Not because they were foolish, but because they were rational actors responding to economic incentives. Gains were real. Productivity exploded. One farmer could manage vastly more land with a tractor than with horses. Fertilizer doubled or tripled yields. Herbicides eliminated the labor of cultivation. Pesticides prevented crop losses. Farm income increased. Food prices dropped. Cities grew because fewer people needed to farm. Variety increased in supermarkets. Bananas from Central America. Coffee from Africa. Chocolate from Asia. The global food system connected every region. People ate foods that didn't grow anywhere near them. This was revolutionary. Unprecedented in human history, modern system fed billions of people who would have starved under old methods. This isn't hyperbole. Global population grew from 2 billion in 1927 to 8 billion today. That growth was possible only because industrial agriculture increased food production faster than population grew. But every gain came with a trade-off. Every increase in efficiency came with a new dependency. Tractors need fuel. Fuel needs refineries. Refineries need crude oil. Crude oil needs drilling operations. Drilling needs political stability. Political stability needs, and the chain extends outward until a farmer in Iowa depends on conditions in the Middle East. Each link in the chain became a potential breaking point. Each dependency created vulnerability. The system became more productive but less resilient. It could feed more people during normal conditions, but became catastrophically fragile during disruptions. The Amish saw this trade-off and refused it. Not because they opposed progress, but because they valued resilience more than efficiency. They watched their neighbors adopt tractors and chose to keep horses. They watched neighbors buy fertilizer and continued composting manure. They watched monocultures spread and maintained crop rotation. This was a deliberate choice. The Amish aren't frozen in time. They make conscious decisions about which technologies to adopt. They use modern medicine when needed. They ride in cars when necessary. They'll use power tools in their workshops in specific contexts, but they evaluate such technology against their core values. Does it strengthen the family? Does it strengthen the community? Does it maintain independence? Tractors failed those tests. They made individual farms more productive but isolated farmers. This was a deliberate choice. The Amish aren't frozen in time. They make conscious decisions about which technologies to adopt. They use modern medicine when needed. They ride in cars when necessary. They'll use power tools in their workshops in specific contexts. but they evaluate each technology against their core values. Does it strengthen the family? Does it strengthen the community? Does it maintain independence? Tractors failed those tests. They made individual farms more productive but isolated farmers. They required external fuel sources. They reduced the need for community cooperation. So the Amish rejected them. Not from ignorance, but from principle. Their farms produce less per acre, but they produce it reliably. In good years and bad years. In peace and crisis. With or without functioning supply chains. The yield is lower, but the consistency is perfect. Consider what happened during the COVID pandemic. This is a perfect case study in system fragility. Meat processing plants shut down when workers got sick. The plants are enormous facilities that process thousands of animals per day. They operate on tight schedules with specialized equipment. When they closed, even temporarily, the entire supply chain backed up. Farmers with thousands of animals ready for slaughter had nowhere to send them. The animals couldn't wait. They cost money to feed every day. So farmers euthanized them by the millions. Pigs, cattle, chickens, destroyed because the processing system couldn't handle a temporary disruption. Meanwhile, grocery stores ran out of meat. The animals existed, the demand existed, but the connection between them had broken. The processing plants were the bottleneck, and there were no alternatives, no parallel systems, no backup options. The system was optimized for normal conditions and failed immediately under stress. Amish communities processed their own meat. They always had. Small-scale operations, family-run. When one family needed to slaughter, others helped. They'd done this for generations. The pandemic changed nothing for them. They continued eating meat from their own animals, processed in their own communities, distributed among their own families. No supply chain disruption, no meat shortages, no dependence on distant facilities. Complete food security through local control. Or consider rising fuel costs over the past few years. Diesel prices doubled, then nearly tripled. For industrial farmers, this was catastrophic. Fuel is a major operational expense. When it doubles, profit margins evaporate. Small operations went bankrupt. They couldn't absorb the increased costs. They couldn't pass them all to consumers. So they sold their land, usually to larger corporate farms. Corporate farms absorbed the costs by raising food prices. So everyone paid more. Consumers paid higher prices for food. Farmers earned less profit because costs increased faster than prices. Only the largest operations benefited. This pattern has repeated throughout agricultural history. Each crisis consolidates land into fewer hands. Small farms fail. Corporate farms expand. The industry becomes less distributed and more vulnerable. Amish farms didn't notice fuel price increases. Horses don't require diesel. Their costs remained stable. Feed prices rose somewhat because industrial farms buy feed, creating general market pressure. But Amish farms grow their own feed. They're insulated from most market fluctuations. This pattern repeats across every crisis. The more complex and optimized a system becomes, the more sensitive it is to disruption. The Amish avstem is simale, which makes it robust. This pattern has repeated throughout agricultural history. Each crisis consolidates land into fewer hands. Small farms fail. Corporate farms expand. The industry becomes less distributed and more vulnerable. Amish farms didn't notice fuel price increases. Horses don't require diesel. Their costs remained stable. Feed prices rose somewhat because industrial farms buy feed, creating general market pressure. But Amish farms grow their own feed. They're insulated from most market fluctuations. This pattern repeats across every crisis. It sacrifices maximum output for reliable output. And in the long term, reliability matters more than peaks. During the Great Depression, industrial farms failed by the thousands. The market collapsed. Prices dropped. Farmers couldn't sell their crops for enough to cover costs. Banks foreclosed. Families lost everything. The Dust Bowl made it worse. Poor farming practices had depleted topsoil. When drought came, the soil blew away. Farms became deserts. Amish farms continued operating. They didn't depend on markets because they produced for themselves first. They didn't suffer Dust Bowl conditions because crop rotation and livestock integration maintained soil health. They didn't lose land to banks because they didn't use debt financing. They endured the depression the same way they endure everything else, by being independent of external systems. But there's something deeper here beyond just farming techniques. The Amish approach isn't just about agriculture, it's about community structure. And this is what makes their system truly different. Modern agriculture isolates farmers. Each operation competes independently. Success means efficiency and scale. Failure means bankruptcy. There's no safety net beyond government subsidies and bank loans. If your crop fails, that's your problem. If equipment breaks, you pay for repairs. If you get injured, you figure it out alone. This creates enormous stress. They understand soil management from working with compost. They understand animal husbandry from daily care. They understand crop rotation from seeing it practiced. Farmers have some of the highest suicide rates of any profession. The isolation is crushing. The financial pressure is relentless. The dependency on factors beyond their control is constant. Good farmers fail because of market conditions, weather, or global events they can't influence. Amish communities function as collective support systems. When someone struggles, others help. When someone succeeds, others benefit. There's no competition because there's no profit motive beyond sustaining the community. This social structure is what makes their agricultural system possible. You can't have resilient farming without resilient communities. The two are inseparable. The Amish understood this. They built both simultaneously. The farming practices require community cooperation. The community cooperation is sustained by shared farming practices. Each reinforces the other. Education happens through apprenticeship. Children work alongside parents from an early age. By 5 or 6, they're doing small tasks. Feeding chickens, collecting eggs, weeding gardens. By 10, they're doing real work. Helping with planting, learning animal care, operating hand tools. They understand. Equipment maintenance from helping with repairs. And crucially, Amish farms remain small enough to manage without exhaustion. Industrial farmers work brutal hours during planting and harvest seasons. They operate massive machinery alone, often at night, pushing themselves to physical limits. Sleep deprivation is normal. 5 or 6, they're doing small tasks. Feeding chickens, collecting eggs, weeding gardens. By 10, they're doing real work. Helping with planting, learning animal care, operating hand tools. By adolescence, they possess skills that would take years to acquire through formal education. They understand soil management from working with compost. They understand animal husbandry from daily care. They understand crop rotation from seeing it practiced. They understand equipment maintenance from helping with repairs. This knowledge transfers across generations without documentation, without schools, without any. It doesn't depend on books or records or systems, it lives in the people. Most farmers today learned their craft from agricultural colleges. They studied soil chemistry from textbooks. They learned crop management from lectures. This knowledge is valuable but fragile. It depends on educational institutions. It depends on documentation. If the systems fail, the knowledge becomes difficult to access or transmit. Institution beyond the family and community. Health problems are common. The scale demands superhuman effort. Amish families work together. Labor is distributed. Multiple people share the workload. No one person carries the full burden. The pace is sustainable. Fathers teach sons who will eventually teach their sons. The knowledge and the land pass through generations. This matters for sustainability. Industrial farmers burn out. The stress, the isolation, the financial pressure, it's unsustainable. So they sell to corporate operations. Land consolidates into fewer hands. Family farms disappear. Knowledge disappears with them. The Amish model prevents this. Farms stay family-sized. Knowledge stays local. Communities remain stable across centuries. Some Amish farms have been in the same family for 10 generations. They've survived everything history threw at them by refusing to build on unstable foundations. There's a lesson here that goes beyond farming, beyond the Amish, beyond agriculture itself. We've built a civilization on the assumption that complexity equals progress, that optimization equals strength, that efficiency is always worth pursuing. And for a while under stable conditions, This assumption holds true. Complex systems produce remarkable results. Optimized supply chains deliver abundance. Efficient processes maximize output. But stability is temporary. It always has been. Systems break. Supply chains fail. Energy becomes expensive or unavailable. Political situations deteriorate. Natural disasters strike. Pandemics spread. And when that happens, the most advanced systems often collapse first. Not because they're poorly designed, but because they're designed for specific conditions that no longer exist. A Formula One race car is the pinnacle of automotive engineering. It's optimized for one thing: speed on a smooth track under ideal conditions. But drive it on a dirt road and it fails immediately. The suspension can't handle rough terrain. The tires aren't designed for loose surfaces. The low ground clearance causes it to bottom out. It's highly advanced and completely useless outside its intended environment. Modern agriculture is similar. It's optimized for current conditions: cheap energy, functioning supply chains, political stability, reliable infrastructure. Under these conditions, it performs miracles. But change the conditions and it fails rapidly. The Amish aren't better farmers by modern metrics. They produce less per acre. They work harder speed on a smooth track under ideal conditions. But drive it on a dirt road and it fails immediately. The suspension can't handle rough terrain. The tires aren't designed for loose surfaces. The low ground clearance causes it to bottom out. It's highly advanced and completely useless outside its intended environment. Modern agriculture is similar. It's optimized for current conditions: cheap energy, functioning supply chains, political stability, reliable infrastructure. Under these conditions, it performs miracles. But change the conditions and it fails rapidly. The Amish aren't better farmers by modern metrics. They produce less per acre. They work harder physically. They live without conveniences most people consider essential. Their lives are more difficult in many ways. But they've created something industrial agriculture hasn't: true independence, genuine resilience, the ability to continue regardless of external circumstances. Their success isn't measured in yield per acre, but in consistency across generations. If every power grid failed tomorrow, if every fuel shipment stopped, if every factory closed, if every supply chain broke, Amish farms would keep operating. Not for weeks, not for months, for generations. Because they're not connected to the systems that would fail. They exist parallel to modernity, not dependent on it. They would eat from their root cellars and their preserved foods. They would plant seeds they saved from last year's harvest. They would plow with horses they bred and fed themselves. They would fertilize with manure from their own livestock. They would harvest with hand tools they built in their own workshops. They would preserve the harvest in canning jars they've accumulated over decades. And next year they would do it again. The rest of the world would be in chaos. Cities would empty as food supplies failed. Industrial farms would sit idle without fuel or fertilizers. The global supply chain that feeds billions would collapse. But the Amish would continue, because they never depended on any of it. That's not a rejection of progress. It's a different definition of it. Progress isn't just about producing more. It's about surviving what comes next. It's about building systems that work during the bad times, not just the good times. It's about resilience, not just efficiency. The Amish have survived everything history has thrown at them. Wars, depressions, pandemics, droughts, technological upheavals, social transformations. They've endured it all by refusing to build their lives on foundations they can't control, by valuing independence over convenience, by choosing resilience over efficiency, by maintaining skills that don't depend on systems that might fail. They're not preparing for the collapse of modern society. They're simply living in a way that doesn't require it to function. And if it does collapse, they won't notice. The plows will keep moving. The silos will stay full. The communities will continue. The rest of us might want to pay attention, not necessarily to adopt their lifestyle. That the most advanced system isn't always the strongest. That efficiency without resilience is fragility. That depending on complex systems you don't control is a form of vulnerability. We don't need to abandon modernity, but we might benefit from building more redundancy into it. More local food production, more distributed systems, more skills that don't require electricity or fuel or global supply chains. Not because collapse is certain, but because it's possible. The Amish have already answered the question we're afraid to ask. What happens if everything we depend on stops working? Their answer is simple. They'll be fine. They always have been. And that might be the most important lesson of all.